a small loch near Vementry, Shetland, and Cleeves, Macmillan, Eshenis Lighthouse and Cliff. Contents: Introduction, Winter, Spring, Summer, Autumn, Conclusion, Map of Shetland, Author Acknowledgements, Picture Credits, Fair Isle Southlight, and at the Lowberry in Lerwick, the location of Jimmy Perez's house in the books and television show. It's exactly 40 years since I first went to Shetland. I dropped out of university and found myself lost and a little miserable in London. I was working as a child care officer for Camden Social Services, a job that I enjoyed, but which involved very long hours. I'd grown up in the country, and in London I had few friends and little support. Then, after a chance meeting in a pub, I was offered a job as assistant cook in the Bird Observatory in Fair Isle. I wasn't even quite sure where Fair Isle was, but I was young. It sounded like an adventure, and more importantly, it represented escape from the city. I arrived on the most remote inhabited island in Shetland, in the UK, in the wake of gale force winds, very seasick and feeling like an imposter. After all, I knew nothing about birds, and I couldn't cook. But it was spring. The cliffs were raucous with seabirds and pink with thrift, and from the moment I stepped ashore, I was enchanted. I loved the island and its people, the routine of crofting and bird migration, the stories of shipwrecks and storms. I met my husband there. He came as a visiting bird watcher and then returned the following year to camp and to work on a friend's croft in return for food and home brew. We left as a couple and we're still together. Since then, Shetland has been my place of sanctuary and inspiration. It's where I go to spend time with friends, to blow away the anxieties of everyday life, and to write. I've set 6 novels there, and I'm already planning 2 more, and the BBC's TV adaptation of my work is airing across the world. Another series is in production, Fair Isle Children. My first visit to Shetland was a time of dramatic change in the islands. Oil was being extracted from the North Sea for the first time, and the big terminal at Sullomvo in North Mainland was under construction. On my rare visits to Shetland mainland, Lerwick, the island's biggest settlement, had the feel of a gold rush town. There was an influx of people who saw the chance of making money. I bumped into suited executives, contractors, and oilmen on their way to the rigs. Shetland has a history of people arriving from outside, though, and I think it managed the time of transition well. It still welcomes visitors with grace and hospitality, whether they're tourists desperate to experience the Fire Festival of Up Heli AA or a BBC film crew. I enjoy writing about the islands just because they are dynamic, changing, and energetic. Don't come to Shetland imagining a Viking theme park, a place fixed in the past. History is important here, but the community looks to the future, to developing sustainable energy and becoming as self-sufficient in food as it can manage. Artists and craftspeople use the traditions of spinning and knitting to create new textile designs. Young musicians play old tunes and write their own music. The islands are bleak and beautiful and very alive. The new observatory was completed in 2010. Fair Isle Northlight, Muckleflugga Lighthouse. Shetland is an archipelago of more than 100 islands that lie at the most northerly point of the United Kingdom. It's over 90 miles long from Outstack in the north to Fair Isle in the south. The islands are long and thin, and perhaps the shape, a little like the hilt of a sword, provides an explanation of its name in Norse, Jaltland. Most of the islands are uninhabited, and approximately one-third of the population of about 22,000 lives in Lerwick. Shetland extends from 59 degrees, 51 foot north to 61 degrees north, the same line of latitude as Anchorage in Alaska and the southern tip of Greenland. Lerwick is in fact closer to the Arctic Circle than to London. Yet while the winters are often wet and windy, Atlantic currents carrying warm water that originated in the Caribbean mean that they are relatively mild. It was the contrast between the dark days of winter and the light nights of summer that prompted me to use the changing seasons as a background to my first 4 books. Mavis Grind. The magic of Shetland's landscape lies in its coastline. It has more than 1,500 miles of shoreline, and wherever one stands, a view is of the water. It's impossible to be more than 3 miles from the sea. At Mavis Grind in North Maveen, the island is so narrow that it would be possible to throw a rock from the North Sea to the Atlantic, if you had a strong arm. There are dramatic sea cliffs at Ishinus in North Maveen, at Hermanus in Unst, in Naas, and, most spectacularly, in the island of Fula, where a small population and a primary school and teacher still survives. Fula, Spiggy Lock, eider ducks on mussel row buoys. Spiggy Beach. There are Vaux, flooded valleys that were scooped out by glaciers and now cut into the land. These provide space for mussel and salmon farms. The mussel ropes look like strings of jet beads, with each bead as a buoy marking the rope below, and the salmon are farmed in cages. And there are locks, big ones like Spiggy, separated from the sea only by a line of dunes and small, nameless pools in the hills. It has been estimated that there are 1,600 locks and pools in the islands. Light is splintered by the water, and the weather is reflected in it, so the outlook changes according to the sunlight and cloud and the time of day. Cut peats drying. There's a rich variety of habitats throughout the archipelago. The high granite areas of North Mainland and Unst are known as Fell Field and are home to Arctic or dwarf forms of plant. Though once it was heavily forested with birch scrub and rowan, there are now few trees in Shetland. A few native species remain in isolated pockets not reached by sheep or rabbits, and attempts have been made to plant conifer plantations. The bare hills create a landscape of long horizons and big skies. About 50% of Shetland is covered in peat, and it is still cut for fuel. Intricately arranged stacks are built to allow the peat to dry. Agriculture is based around sheep. There are more than 100,000 of them in the islands. Though some of the lowland is cultivated, the pattern of small crops with strip fields, more common when I first arrived in the 1970s, has largely disappeared. Farmhouse and ruined crofts on Fula. The inhabited islands are connected by bridge, like that to Trondra, both Burra Isles and Muckle Row, or by regular ferry. It's possible to commute to Lerwick from Bressie, Walsey, or even Yell. The more remote islands of Fula and Ferrol are reached by a mail boat that can take passengers, but not their cars. These crossings aren't always comfortable or even possible, and many islanders and visitors prefer to use the small planes operated by the Shetland Island Council from Tingwall Airport. On a clear day, it's a spectacular way to come into the more remote islands. Visitors arrive into Shetland by plane from Glasgow, Inverness, Edinburgh, or Aberdeen, into Sunburg Airport to the south of mainland, or by overnight ferry from Aberdeen into Lerwick. Burra Bridge, Tingwall looking towards Trondheim Bridge. Moosa Brock, Ravens and Wind Turbines. Here Magnus, a character inspired by an elderly Fair Islander who became a good friend, looks out at the ravens on his croft. There were ravens on his land, always had been since he was a peery boy. Sometimes it was as if they were playing. You could see them in the sky wheeling and turning like children chasing each other in a game. Then they'd fold up their wings and fall out of the sky. Magnus could feel how exciting that must be, the wind rushing past, the speed of the dive. Then they'd fly out of the fall, and their call sounded like laughter. The book's theme is belonging. I've always been interested in the ways outsiders find a fit into their host communities. I needed a central character who was a Shetlander, but also an outsider, so Jimmy Perez was born. He comes from Fair Isle, considered by many Shetlanders as the edge of the known universe, and has Spanish ancestry, which gives him dark hair and olive skin. An Armada ship, blown well off course, was wrecked on the rocks off Fair Isle. It was called El Grant Griffin, and its mast tipped onto the rocks and enabled 60 survivors to climb ashore. I took this fact and used it to provide Jimmy's background. I thought it wasn't beyond the bounds of possibility that one of the Spanish sailors had married an island lass and given his name to a new family. I was always told that Fair Isle's famous knitting derived from the bright colors and Catholic iconography seen on the Spanish ship. Crosses do indeed feature in the traditional patterns, but an expert has informed me that pattern knitting didn't become common in the islands until much more recently. So perhaps the connection has just developed over time into an interesting story. The Loadberry. Most of the action in Raven Black takes place in the fictional settlement of Ravenswick. In my head, this is in southeast mainland, somewhere between Sandwick and the glorious beach at Leavenwick, though the geography is very much my own. I've created a headland and a valley leading down to the sea, and Fran's home has a view of the island of Musa. Jimmy Perez's house, though, is quite real. This is the Loadberry, close to the Queen's Hotel in Lerwick. The walls of the house stand in the water, and you can still see the pulleys that were once used to bring goods ashore from the boats beneath. The owner is extremely tolerant and is now used to tourists taking photos and to the TV crews who film there. The BBC's interior of the house has been built in the studio in Scotland and bears no resemblance to the inside of the Loadberry, though I understand that people do occasionally knock at the door and ask for Jimmy Perez. Lerwick Waterfront. Another of the places mentioned in Raven Black is the the home belonging to Duncan Hunter. Jimmy went to high school with Duncan, and throughout the first 4 books, he develops a relationship with Duncan's ex-wife, Fran. Duncan's family were once lairds, owning land throughout the Isles. When I was describing his family home, I had the Busta House Hotel in Bray in my head. Busta is an old laird's house, once belonging to the Gifford family. It was extended over the years, and a new wing was built in the 1970s to provide accommodation for the oil executives who came to work in Sullom Voe, not very far away. The oldest part of the house has a beautiful long room, now used as a visitor's lounge. And if they're lucky, visitors can enjoy music provided by the owner's daughter, who is a harpist. There are wonderful stories attached to Busta House, involving feuds, a secret marriage, an illegitimate heir, and a suspicious death. And of course it's supposed to have a ghost. The house has a terraced walled garden leading down to the water and is popular with locals as a wedding venue. The BBC used it as a location when they were filming an adaptation of another book, Deadwater. The Busta House Hotel. Winter in Shetland is a time for indoor activity, and a passion for spinning and knitting is still shared by islanders and by people who have settled there more recently. Legend has it that different knitting patterns belong to individual families. So if a man was lost at sea, he could be identified by his jersey or gansey. In the 19th century, women supplemented their income by knitting and made a major contribution to a community's finances. Even before that, Shetland knitted stockings were traded through the Hanseatic League. Until very recently, all Shetland children were taught to knit in school, and Bairns knitting classes are now organized in the Shetland Museum and in Walsey and Unst. The natural fleeces from island sheep come in many different shades, from black, dark brown, through murret, a reddish brown, gray, and white. White is the most common color and the most easy to dye. The fleeces are much sought after by knitters away from Shetland, and the yarn is exported all over the world. While most of us think of ferrule patterns on jerseys, hats, and mittens, there is a tradition of a very different style of knitting too, in which the yarn has been spun very thin and the finished product is a delicate lace. A young woman's hand-knitted wedding veil traditionally had to be so fine that it could be pulled through her wedding ring. There is still a flourishing interest in all kinds of textile crafts in the islands. A degree course in the subject is taught at the college, and young designers have developed novel techniques and use authentic materials in exciting ways. People come from all over the world to Wool Week, when there is a full program of workshops, lectures, and social events. The Textile Museum in Grimista, Lerwick, has fine examples of knitting, and volunteers explain the art and craft of the island's textile tradition and give spinning demonstrations. Shetland sheep fleece. A Shetland lace bridal veil, which won a gold medal at the Great Exhibition in 1851. A Shetlander knits while carrying a basket of cut peat. Sea Point, 1885. A good drying day on Fair Isle. Flying from Fair Isle to mainland. The view out of the right window is across the Min Beach in Burra. In Shetland, the weather matters. Everyone knows which way the wind is blowing. Wind direction and speed influence which door you use to get into the house, whether the Northlink ferry can dock in Aberdeen, and whether the small planes to the outer islands can take off. These planes provide a vital service for residents in Fair Isle, Fula, and the Outskerries. When children from the Out Isles reach the age of 11, they begin boarding in the hostel in the Anderson High School, and it's the small planes that take them back to school after the Christmas break. They also carry people to dental, hospital outpatient, and hairdressing appointments, and deliver newspapers and the post. Strong winds and fog can cause folk to be stranded and miss their connection south. Most islanders allow time for possible delay or cancellation, but it can be stressful for visitors who don't quite understand the impact of the weather on everyday life. Winter is a time of dramatic gales and seas that can lift rocks the size of a small child to the top of the highest cliffs. There is something exhilarating and elemental about watching the huge waves crash over the sea stacks and tasting the salt in the air as spindrift blows inland. But sometimes the wind drops and the sky clears. Winter is the time of year, too, when on a still, cloudless night it's possible to see the northern lights, known in Shetland as the Merry Dancers. Shetland is probably the best place in the UK to view them, though I've never been lucky enough to experience the phenomenon. Aurora over Tingwall Loch. Replica Skeckler outfits made by Ewan Balfour. In the past, Shetlanders had to make their own entertainment in the dark days of winter. While Christmas, the Shetland wren. Shetland is famous for its natural history, and many visitors come in the hope of seeing otters, orcas, or puffins, known in Shetland as Tamminories. While the islands have a population of around 22,000 people, there are 300,000 pairs of the most common seabird, the fulmar, breeding on the sea cliffs. In winter, however, the cliffs are bare and many of the bird species seen in the islands come from even further north, from the northwest and northeast. Shetland's resident mammals can be seen throughout the year. After all, they have nowhere to go. It's thought that all the land species in the islands were introduced over the last 6,000 years. Even the otter is unlikely to have arrived unaided. The isolation of the population means that some animals have evolved slightly differently from UK mainland species. For example, there are a number of distinct variations of Shetland mouse, and separate subspecies have been described in Yell, Fula, and Fair Isle. All have slightly redder fur than UK mainland mice, and both Shetland house and field mice are slightly larger. The Shetland wren is larger than the bird found elsewhere in Britain, and another separate subspecies has developed just in Fair Isle. The Fair Isle wrens are smaller than those in mainland Shetland, but bigger than those in mainland UK. A mother otter and her cub on the shore. Shetland probably has a larger otter population than anywhere else in Britain, and visitors can see these animals throughout the islands. While they are most readily visible at dawn and dusk, it's possible to catch a glimpse of them at any time of day, especially on the boulder beaches or around the piers while waiting for an inter-island ferry. There are rabbits in huge numbers and a variety of colors all over the islands. There are no natural predators except man in Shetland, so white, black, and multicolored rabbits can survive in the brown landscape, as well as better camouflaged individuals. The mountain hare was introduced from Scotland to the Kurgert estate in about 1907 and is now found on heather moorland throughout Shetland mainland. It doesn't turn completely white in winter, but heavy snow is unusual, so it still stands out against the bare hillside. The brown hare, which was also introduced, has now died out. A mountain hare. Most of Shetland's breeding birds desert the islands in the winter, but they are replaced by migrants moving south, often from their breeding territories. Sheltered voes and coastal bays are home to divers and to Slavonian grebes. The black-throated diver is a rare visitor, but the larger and impressive great northern diver is more regular. It has a distinctive thick-set head, stout neck, and long straight bill. In flight, its feet project behind it like big spades. Research has shown that approximately 50% of the wintering great northern divers come from breeding sites in Iceland. The remaining birds originate in Greenland and northeastern Canada. Sea ducks include the sociable eiders, dunters in Shetland dialect, which collect in groups along the shore. Their calls sound like the gentle murmuring of gossiping old ladies. In late winter, the black and white males throw back their heads in display. There are also long-tailed ducks, golden eyes, and red-breasted mergansers. A large group of widgeon, another species of duck, might be seen in the low farmland pastures. Their distinctive whistling sound of wee-oh-oh carries far along the coast as they crop the short grass. They will have traveled from Iceland, Scandinavia, or Russia. The great northern diver. Cliffs on Bressie near Lerwick. A flock of widgeon. Wading birds find a winter home in the islands. Turnstones and ringed plovers are widely distributed. They can be seen on rocky headlands as well as along the shore in sandy bays. And dark purple sandpipers, recognizable by their curved bills, forage among the seaweed and barnacle-covered rocks. It has been discovered that the shorter-billed birds originate from the Norwegian archipelago of Svalbard and from Scandinavian populations, and the longer-billed individuals are from Arctic Canada. Both groups can figure in Shetland's wintering and migratory flocks. Greylag geese breed in Shetland, but their numbers increase substantially in winter. They find the low grassland to their liking, and the habitat can attract up to 10,000 individuals. Many of these birds will have come from Iceland. A ringed plover, a purple sandpiper, a greylag goose, a flock of snow buntings. I'm not a bird watcher, but occasionally I'm moved by a sight that takes my breath away. The vision of hundreds of snow buntings, as white as snowflakes, twisting together as a flock across the in-by land on the Shetland coast has done just that. The Shetland name for the species is sna, full, or snowbird, and once it was considered good eating in the Northern Isles, either boiled or roasted. The birds were usually caught in simple traps set around the crofts, but there are also records of them being caught in fair, albeit horsehair nooses attached to a board. Now they are appreciated for the spectacle they provide, rather than for their taste. Although snow buntings do breed in small numbers in the Scottish Highlands, most of the birds that arrive in Shetland from mid-autumn onwards are migrants from the north. Ringing recoveries show that the majority of these individuals come from Iceland, while the rest are from Greenland. In the last 50 years, the numbers of winter and migrating snow buntings have declined. If climate change means that the birds will winter further north, this trend is likely to continue, and I'll miss out on the glory of a flock of black and white snow buntings brightening a gloomy Shetland day. Hooper swans at sunset. Even in stormy weather, it's possible to hear hooper swans over the noise of the wind before you see them flying in from the coast. They are named after the loud whooping of their call. When the swans travel in family groups, it's easy to spot the browner young birds, which have hatched in Iceland that summer. Most hooper swans seen in Shetland are birds passing through in the autumn, but some stay and spend the winter on one of the larger locks. These birds first bred in Shetland in 1994, and very small numbers have been recorded breeding in recent years. Their movement has been charted by ornithologists, who mark the swans with numbered colored rings. When I worked in the observatory and fair, I helped the scientists one night when they went to catch swans for ringing on golden water, a loch to the north of the island. One person dazzled the swan with torchlight while the other moved behind it to catch it. I traveled back to base in the observatory Land Rover with a swan on my knee. Once there, it was weighed, ringed, and then released. Ishanis Cliffs and Muckalasa in the distance. An Iceland gull, Arasa's gull. Interesting gulls can be seen in Shetland's harbors and inshore waters as they search for food. In recent years, the area around the Shetland Catch fish processing building in Lerwick has been a great place to watch. Birders are looking out for the white wingers, birding slang for glaucus and Iceland gulls. The glaucus gull is a heavy-backed monster, which may have come from Svalbard or from further west. Confusingly, Iceland gulls don't come from Iceland, but breed in Greenland. While these gulls catch the attention of birdwatchers, there are two even rarer visitors to the islands, which are considered much more exciting. Both Ross's gull and the ivory gull are beautiful and very occasional visitors. Ross's gull is a stunning bird, with its delicate black bill and diamond-shaped tail. The first ever in this scene from the book, Evelyn, an island woman, is working as a volunteer on the excavation with two young archaeologists and has come across a piece of bone. Mima, Sandy's grandmother, is watching. An archaeological dig unanswered. When Evelyn went back to work on the practice trench, the older woman stood watching. Mima was wearing black crimpling trousers and Wellingtons that flapped around her knees. She'd thrown a threadbare gray fleece over her shoulders. Hattie thought she looked like a hooded crow standing there watching her daughter-in-law work. A hooded crow ready to snatch at a fragment of food. "Well, Evelyn, what do you look like?" Mima said, "On your hands and knees like some sort of beast. In this light, you could be one of Joseph's beasts, grubbing around in the soil there. You be careful or he'll be slitting your throat and eating you as bacon." She laughed so loud that she coughed and spluttered. Evelyn said nothing. She knelt up and glared. Hattie felt sorry for her. She'd never known Mima be so cruel. Hattie jumped into the trench beside Evelyn. The bone was protruding from the earth now, largely uncovered. Hattie took her own trowel from her jeans pocket. With intense concentration, she stripped away more of the soil, then took a brush. The shape of the bone became more defined. There was a pleasing curve, a sculptured hollow. "Pars orbitalis," she said. Shock and excitement made her forget her earlier resolve not to show off, to keep her language simple so Evelyn would understand. Evelyn looked at her. "The frontal orbit," Hattie said. "This is part of a human skull." "Oh no," Mima said. Hattie looked up at her and saw that her face was white. "That cannot be right." No, that cannot be." The ferry approaching Toft, mainland. Val Turner, the archaeologist, appears as herself in the novel. I offered to change her into an elderly man, but she insisted that she wanted to stay just as she was. She also helped create the dig on set on Mima's land for the BBC adaptation of the story. The first trench dug by the crew apparently looked nothing like the real thing. I've become relaxed over the years about the changes that take place in character and story in the adaptation process. This is especially true of location. And while locals are puzzled when island locations jump to shots obviously filmed on the Scottish mainland, I'm beginning to appreciate why this has to happen. The production team of the Shetland pilot Redbones decided that Bressie, an island with a direct and very short ferry service in Lerwick, was a more convenient location for filming than Walsey, and the place they used for Mima's house was actually in Whiteness to the west of Shetland mainland, and was the home of the then head of Shetland Arts. Then they had to decide how to describe Shetland mainland and distinguish it from the Scottish mainland. While every Shetlander and visitor understands that when islanders talk about mainland, they mean the largest Shetland Isle, it was felt that might not be clear to an overseas audience, so the rather clumsy phrase, the main island, was used instead. The partially restored settlement at Old Scatness Brock. Archaeology is important in the islands. Shetland is believed to hold several thousand prehistoric sites. There are Bronze Age burnt mounds and Iron Age brocks, and from later periods Pictish wheelhouses, Viking and Norse longhouses, and post-medieval fortifications. The best example of an Iron Age settlement is at Old Scatness, where excavations undertaken by Bradford University and Shetland Amenity Trust have revealed a broch surrounded by a whole Iron Age village. Today it's possible for visitors to see the recreated roundhouses and to feel that they're experiencing the period by taking part in the guided walks and living history demonstrations. Lotting Home. The 1604 old house at Jarlshof is the newest building at the site. The earliest dates from before 2500 BC. There is evidence of Viking and Norse settlements throughout the islands. Shetland was ideally placed as a stepping stone for North Atlantic travel from Norway. The most impressive and most visited site is at Jarlshof, a multi-period settlement close to Sundberg Airport in South Mainland. There's also been an excavation at Loch Tingholm, the site of the Parliament in the Ting Loch, inland from Scalloway. Debate took place on this promontory at the northern end of the loch until the 1570s, when the Parliament was moved to Scalloway Castle. The replica longship and longhouse at Haraldswick, Unst, the most northerly of Shetland's islands, was one of the first landfalls for Vikings coming from Scandinavia and is fantastic evidence of their presence. More than 30 Viking longhouses have been discovered so far, and the Unst Viking project has enabled access to 3, Belmod, Hamar, and Underhowl. A replica longhouse and longship can be found at Brook Point, Haraldswick, which is said to represent the first footfall of Vikings in Shetland. In the 16th century, landowners built castles at Scalloway in mainland and at Munis in Unst. Fort Charlotte was built in Lerwick during the Second Dutch War in the 17th century. Visitors can explore an array of 20th century military remains too. Australian singer and songwriter Frank Yama, performing in Islesburg at the Shetland Folk Festival 2015. Music weaves its magic throughout Shetland life. It's a major part of the festivities at family celebrations, weddings and heimferens, and dances in community halls still bring communities together. Music charts the history of Shetland life. There are tunes to mark special events and to keep old legends alive. You hear live music in bars, and often on the Northlink ferry from Aberdeen to Lerwick. And that's certainly true in the run-up to the Shetland Folk Festival, which takes place every year in late spring. The festival seems to start on the boat and doesn't stop until the early hours of the last day. The Folk Festival was born in 1981, and the format that was decided on by the founding committee is still followed today. The event celebrates the island's unique fiddle tradition and rich musical heritage, but local artists share the stage with performers from all over the world. Among the artists at the first festival were Catherine Tickle from Northumberland, My Own Part of the World, the late Sean Maguire, and Dick Gahn, whose verdict after the 4-day event was, "This festival should carry a government health warning. Nobody sleeps." This, too, seems to be a tradition that continues to the present day. The festival has always been run and organized by a committee of volunteers, whose aim is to take the music and musicians to venues throughout the islands. The long weekend features music from many traditions, from American bluegrass to Scandinavian progressive folk rock. The visiting artists are accommodated in local people's homes, and volunteers run the bars and drive the musicians to the community halls where they will be performing. The special mix of fostering local talent while welcoming the new, the exotic, and the unusual provides a unique Shetland experience. Folk Festival Concert at Clickaman. The Lights of Scalloway by Moonlight. The large ship is an accommodation vessel, housing workers building a new gas plant at Sullenville. Deadwater was my second spring book. I had only intended there to be 4 novels in the Shetland series, but after the first quartet, which ended with Blue Lightning, I felt that I still had things to say about the islands. The first books are rather quiet and domestic. They're about families and the way they can crack under stress. Dead water, another unique wedding practice, finds its way into the book. I was intrigued to see two life-sized models of people, rather like scarecrows or bonfire night guys, lying at the entrance to a croft in North Mainland. The models were dressed and wore masks made from the photographs of a couple's faces. Although these figures are made in celebration of a newly married couple, they seemed a little sinister to me. And I thought they would be even more sinister if one of the guys was replaced by a dead body. You can see straw skeckler costumes that were part of Shetland's guising tradition in the Shetland Museum in Lerwick. So perhaps this is simply a modern development of a more ancient practice. Lerwick under a blue sky. Thrift on the cliff top at Sunburn. Marsh marigolds by the ruined watermills at Huckster. Yellow flag iris. Red campion. While spring seems to come in a series of false starts in Shetland, with cold windy days intruding far into the season, the natural world responds to the longer daylight. As the season progresses, the islands become a riot of color after the grays and browns of winter. The tops of the cliffs are covered in the blue of spring squill and the pink of thrift. The pressure of grazing by sheep restricts the wild flowers to the cliff tops, to fenced fields, and to marshy areas. The waterlogged bogs are home to bright yellow kingcups and marsh marigolds, to seggies, yellow flag irises, and to the dark pink Shetland red campion, a Scottish lapwing. Perhaps the first signs of spring in the birding world occur in gardens when the local blackbirds start to pair up and seek out a nest site. By late March, ravens have selected their nest sites and are still cementing their pair bonds by rolling and tumbling in the sky. Further south in Britain, wading birds have been under pressure for decades, squeezed by agricultural improvements and changes in farming practice. In contrast, Shetland still retains a reasonable number of curlew, lapwing, snipe, and redshank. By late March, curlews are bubbling across the open hillside. On the low-end by-land lapwing are displaying too, and their characteristic pee-wit calls echo around the crofts. Skylarks make their presence known as well. You might not see them, except as specks high in the sky, but you will hear their liquid, never-ending song. Curlew feeding at the shoreline. A skylark. A puffin on nos. A wheatear. For me, spring and fair all means the arrival of wheatears hopping along the dry stone dike that separates the road from the flower-rich marshy area of Gilsetter. The bird's name is taken from the Old English words wit and airs, meaning white arse, and it's the white rump of the bird that we glimpse in short-cropped grass or on stone walls. And, of course, in Shetland spring is the time when the seabirds come back to the cliffs, and with their arrival we know that we have almost reached summer. The Tombolo, spit of land, between Big Ton and Street Ninian. Sea mist over Nos. Water Lilies by Vagaland, 1909 to 1973. Vindo à visão budes da water lilies, when the leaves and buds of the water lilies spread round the loch dir dark green frill, spread round the loch their dark green frill. I took my Tusker by Lungawater. I took my peat spade by Lungawater, and crossed a bank near Storborough Hill, and cut a peat bank near Storborough Hill. The hill like a cummeled boat Whistlion. The hill lay like an overturned boat. Grown our why moss Ida lang Joan days. Grown over with moss in the long June days. And white oppo white the water lilies. And white upon white were the water lilies. One du converé oui me tarez. when you came there with me to raise the peats. Thus stuck these bays on the corn god did it. The peat stack was built and the corn gathered in. Andan u heta ging ava. And then I had to go away. Biditin ko the lilies eft w length. But I think of the lilies oft with longing. No, everything is smowered in sna. Now everything is smothered in snow. I think o DB to open fire. I think of you by the open fire. As Du sits and looks at the golden glod. As you sit and look at the golden glow. Lay gold-eyed cups, O white water lilies. Like gold in the cups of the white water lilies. Hvor drank sweetness a furi gede. Where I drank sweetness before I left. Midsummer in Shetland is a season of long days. And in June there are times when the sun seems to slide towards the horizon and then reappear almost immediately. In midsummer the sun is up for 18 hours and 50 minutes, contrasting with just 5 hours and 30 minutes in midwinter. It's possible to read a newspaper outside at midnight and the birds are still singing then. Shetlanders call this the simmer dim or summer dusk. I once asked a young crofter what summer meant for him. He thought for a moment. Singling neeps, thinning turnip seedlings, and clipping sheep, he said. There was another pause, followed by a big grin. And partying. There can be spells of wonderful, clear weather in the summer. I've swum in the sea and enjoyed beach parties and barbecues, and even spent several days in a row without a jersey. There are magnificent beaches throughout Shetland, and usually they are empty. But this can also be a time of thick fog that sweeps in from the sea and covers the islands in cloud, when the rest of the UK, and even Orkney to the south, is in full sunshine. The BBC Shetland series has been praised for its brooding atmosphere. Part of that was the result of brilliant direction. But partly it was the midsummer fog that caused a logistical nightmare for the production team, as actors and crew were stranded on the Scottish mainland when flights were cancelled, and there were frantic drives to Aberdeen to catch the Northlink ferry. The appearance and disappearance of the low cloud and mist must have caused severe problems of continuity. Fiddler's Bid, painted by Richard Weems. Chris Stout is on the right. In White Nights, I try to capture the magic and madness of midsummer in the islands. I hope it's a book about theater and pretense, and things not being quite as they seem. The sense of performance and showiness is represented by one of the characters in the book, a young fiddler called Roddy Sinclair. Roddy is inspired by, though not exactly based on, a musician called Chris Stout, a Fair Islander by birth, who was a founder member of the Fiddler's Bid Band. There is a terrific painting of the group by Richard Weems in the library in Lerwick, and I used that too as part of the plot of my novel Deadwater. Postcards of the painting are found on the bodies and provide a clue to the identity of the murderer. Chris Stout has gone on to work with musicians from Scandinavia and South America and has achieved worldwide recognition. One of his albums is called White Nights and was inspired by the novel. So there's been a circle of influence, and at the heart of it all was the wildness of midsummer. I hope this extract sums up the joy and exhilaration of the music, the man, and the time of year. Roddy stood framed by light in the middle of the space. It was 9 in the evening, but still sunshine came through the windows cut into the tall, sloping roof. It was reflected from the polished wooden floor and the whitewashed walls and lit his face. He stood still for a moment, grinning, waiting until the guests started to look at him, absolutely sure he would get their attention. Conversation faltered and the room grew quiet. He looked at his aunt, who gave him a look that was at once indulgent and grateful. He lifted his fiddle gripped it under his chin, and waited again. There was a moment of silence, and he began to play. The Vidlin party was to celebrate the wedding of Stephen and Charlotte. Stephen Robertson is the actor who brings Sandy Wilson to life in the TV series. He also played Jimmy Perez in BBC Radio 4's adaptation of White Nights. So, I was aware of his work and was delighted when I found out that he had been cast as Sandy. It's fantastic to have a Shetlander as a regular member of the show. And now another actor who grew up in the islands, Marnie Baxter, will join him, so we'll have two authentic Shetland voices. St. Ninian's Isle. My husband and I traveled to Shetland especially for Stephen's party and had decided to use the ferry. Perhaps not the best idea at that time of the year. It had been a rough crossing. We didn't get much sleep, and we were still feeling a little lightheaded and weird in the evening when we arrived at the Vidlin Hall. It had been decorated for the event with bunting and balloons, and there was a big banner with the happy couple's names on one wall. The Calivo band had already started playing, and during the bridal march, Stephen and Charlotte paraded around the room to the applause of family and friends. When I lived in Fair Isle, I'd started to learn some of the steps of the more common dances, but the memory had faded, and I was put to shame by even the youngest children. So for most of the party, I sat and watched the action. I was a disengaged observer, a state when most riders are at their happiest. Halfway through the evening, there was a break for supper. There's a tradition that the young friends of the bride and groom serve the meal, and the food is traditional fare too. In Vidlin that night, there was lentil broth, followed by cold meat and bannocks. The meat was salt beef and reested mutton. I was chatting to poet and broadcaster Mary Blance, who is an old friend and who coached actor Brian Cox on his accent when he played Magnus in the TV episode of Raven Black. She mentioned that the food we were being offered was known as bannocks and flesh in the islands. And just that phrase was enough to give me the idea for the start of my next novel. The word flesh, after all, comes with baggage. There is something sinister about it, especially if it's being eaten. It makes me think of cannibalism and also reminds me a little of the ritual of Holy Communion. So it conjured up the traditions of the islands, but set them within a wider context. Sandwich Beach on Unst. And as I was sitting there watching, still feeling a little strange because of the ferry and feeling an outsider because I couldn't join in with the dancing, the premise of the novel arrived like a wonderful form of magic. Sometimes a novel comes after weeks of deliberation, of grappling with stray notions and ideas. There are false starts and weeks of discouragement. Thin Air felt more like a gift. In the book, I would bring a group of educated 30-somethings from London to a wedding party in Shetland. They would bring with them the confidence of people who have a comfortable income and a sense that they understand the world better than the islanders, who seldom travel away from home. One of them would be a specialist in legend and folk tales, and another would be a television documentary maker. The two would be outsiders looking in. Almost as if they were visitors to a human zoo, they would be interested in island customs, but they would appear superior and a little patronizing. Then, as the book progressed and bizarre events occurred, they would realize that their knowledge and experience of the city would be unable to help them. Old and nuanced, Thin Air isn't set in Vidlin, where the book was conceived, but in Unst, Shetland's most northerly inhabited island. Unst is 2 ferry rides away from Lerwick, and I wanted to send my fictitious group of friends to the furthest extreme of the archipelago. And I changed the time of year, so that the Heimfaren takes place in midsummer, the natural season for a Shetland party, and to give another example of the extremes that the island can provide. It's said that Unst has a ghost. She's called the White Wife, and she appears to lone male drivers when they're driving down the road from Baltasound late at night. The Unst Brewery has named a beer after her. The White Wife didn't seem a very interesting apparition to me, so I created my own ghost, a young girl called Peary Lizzie. Peary is the Shetland dialect word for small. In the story, Elizabeth Gelded was the daughter of the big house, who was drowned in 1930. This scene comes from the beginning of the book, where we first meet the child who could be Peary Lizzie. From a hall behind her came the sound of the band finishing another tune, laughter and the clink of crockery being washed up in the kitchen. On the beach below, a couple sat smoking. Polly could see them only as silhouettes. Then a little girl appeared from nowhere. She was dressed in white, and the low light caught her, and she seemed to shine. The dress was high-waisted and trimmed with lace, and she wore white ribbons in her hair. She stretched out her arms to hold the skirt wide and skipped across the sand, dancing to the music in her head. As Polly watched, the girl turned to her and curtsied. Polly stood and clapped her hands. She looked around her to see if there were any other adults watching. She hadn't noticed the girl in the party earlier, but she must be there with her parents. Perhaps she belonged to the couple sitting below her. But when she turned back to the tittle-line, the girl had vanished, and all that was left was a shimmering reflection of the rising moon in the water. The lighthouse on Muckle Flugga, Outstack, is just visible on the right. There is nowhere further north to live in the UK than Unst. Apart from the stacks of Muckle Flugga and Outstack, the next land north from the top of the island is the Arctic. Muckle Flugga has a famous lighthouse built in 1858 during the Crimean War by David and Thomas Stevenson. It is claimed that the men's nephew, Robert Lewis, based his Treasure Island map on Unst, a place he visited when his uncles were working there, though we don't know that he actually wrote the book on the island. Perhaps the place sparked the idea for the novel, just as the wedding party in Vidland sparked the idea for Thin Air. I like to think so. Unst is 12 miles long from north to south and 5 miles wide from east to west, and it has a population of approximately 700. It's a very scenic island, and some Shetlanders who live in the town of Lerwick have holiday homes there, to which they can come during summer weekends to relax. It's that sort of place, relaxed, sociable, with some beautiful sandy beaches and great walking. Unst has its own festivals and traditions, and even holds its own up Heliaa. In fact, it has 2 fire festivals, one in Uya Sound and another at Norwich. The Keen of Hamar. The island has 2 national nature reserves, one at the Keen of Hamar and one at Hermanus. The Keen of Hamar is famous for the flora that grows on the serpentine fell field there. Most important is a species of Arctic chickweed only found on the island. Its significance was first recognized by a young Unst botanist called Thomas Edmonston. He published a paper describing the plant in 1843 when he was just 18, and since then it has been known as Edmonston's chickweed. There is a sad ending to his story, however. He became a professor of botany at the University of Glasgow at the age of 20, but died only a year later when he was on a scientific expedition to Peru. Edmonston's chickweed. The boardwalk through Hermanus Nature Reserve should be safe. Abanksi. I first visited Hermanus, Unst's second National Nature Reserve, on my first visit to Shetland in 1975, and was astounded by its spectacular cliffs and the ferocity of the breeding great and Arctic skuas. Great skuas, the heavier browner species, are called bonksies in Shetland and the name is now common among birdwatchers throughout the UK. The skuas are fiercely protective of their breeding gray seals. Gray and harbor were common. Seals are easy to spot on Shetland shores, but some rare species of seal, normally found in the Arctic, visit too. One of these is the ringed seal, which has been recorded on a number of occasions. Another is the bearded seal, which has whiskers like a tough nylon brush and uses them to search for clams and other shellfish along the ocean floor. About 12 of these sturdy creatures have been seen in modern times. The final rare species of seal seen in Shetland is again an Arctic dweller, the hooded seal. It has only been possible to track these animals through specialist telemetry studies, which have proved that the species spends time to the north and west of Shetland and in waters around the Faroe Islands. A bearded seal. Harbor seals. Both gray and harbor seals breed in Shetland and delight visitors, who can get very close to them. A good place to see them is in Lerwick, near the big supermarket by Clickham Lock, or from Fjara, the new cafe bar in the same area. Harbor seals have their pups in the summer. The adult harbor seals have a rather rounded, pug-shaped face, whereas gray seals, especially the larger bulls, have a longer, flattened nose. When they are ashore resting, harbor seals have a characteristic banana-shaped profile with both head and tail raised. They hunt in the rich kelp beds along the coasts. Gray seals are longer than harbor seals and tend to hunt in deeper waters. They produce their pups in autumn, and many young animals can be lost when huge waves caused by seasonal storms blow into the exposed sites at the foot of the cliffs. As with the seabirds, sand eels form a considerable part of the seals' diets. Seals have inspired many legends and folk tales. The most common concerns the Selkies, or seal people, who are human on land and become animals in the water. There is one midsummer story about a Shetlander who falls in love with the human form of a Selkie and follows it beneath the waves to his doom. A road sign in Northmavine. Shetland is also famous for its otters. Unlike the rest of the UK, where they are most often seen in freshwater streams and rivers, otters here are found almost entirely on the coast. They hunt in the sea in sheltered bays, among seaweed, on small islets or boulder beaches, and their food consists of a variety of inshore fish, although they also take crabs. Signs indicate where drivers should take care of them crossing the roads. While there are no otters present in Fula or Fair Isle, there are perhaps 1,000 individuals in the other islands. Otters usually have 2 young, or kits, born between May and August. While in mainland Britain otters are largely nocturnal, because of increased summer daylight, they have become accustomed to diurnal living in Shetland, and it's possible to see them at any time of the day. A traveler waiting for an inter-island ferry has a good chance of glimpsing an animal close to the breakwaters, because these large boulders are ideal sites for an otter hold. An otter on the beach. The Simmerdim. Sunset on the summer solstice 2015 at the northern tip of Unst. Midsummer is the time to experience one of the more magical Shetland moments, something that brings the sea, the wildlife, and the history of the islands together in one place. Musa is an uninhabited island to the south of mainland, visible from a main road from Lerwick to Sunburg. It is managed by the RSBB and is famous for its Brock, the most complete tower of its kind in the world. Musa was first mentioned in Icelandic chronicles in the 9th century, and the Brock itself features in 2 of the Viking sagas. In the 18th century, the island supported 11 households. But by the end of the 19th century, the last residents had left. In midsummer, the ferryman who provides visitor access to Musa from the pier in Sandwich organizes a very special trip. The boat leaves late in the evening, just as it is getting dusk. In May and July, the departure time is 10:30 p.m., and in June it's 11 p.m. On a fine, clear night, it's a magical experience to travel to the small island in the strange half-light of a Shetland midsummer, which local people call the Simmerdim. We made the trip with local friends who came well prepared, with flasks of hot tea and extra warm clothing. A storm petrel nesting in the wall of Musa Brock, right. As we walked towards the Brock, it was still light enough to see how well the tower had been preserved and to marvel at the skill that went into the building of it. It's even possible to climb the steps between the double skin of the outer wall and stare out from the lookout points, as people must have done centuries ago. As it grew darker, we began to hear noises from the walls of the Brock and from the ruined field walls close by. It sounded a little like the murmuring of small mammals. Then we were aware of the movement of tiny bat-like birds flying into the island, black and shadowy against the gray dusk sky. These were storm petrels, which feed during the day at sea and use the half-light to protect themselves from predators as they return to their nests to feed their young. When the small boat returned to Sandwich, the darkest period of the night was already over. We were chilly by then and glad of the extra clothing we had brought with us. As we drove north to Bray, where we were staying, we could see the sun already sliding up from the horizon to mark a new day. Tourist boat passing Musa Brock. Looking back at Fairhour. Shetland Wren by Jack Renwick. 1924 to 2010. Galishirikin to the high heavens. Gale shrieking to the high heavens. Why a hail-laced fury uring, with a hail-laced fury of rain. Our a tangle twistin', warblade tration. Over a tangle twisting, seaweed thrashing. Froden fish kettle OAC. Frothing fish kettle of the sea. Aerial braquant, puercuting, mamburstin. Aerial breaking, power cutting, mains bursting. Wire snapping, nature in a pashin. Wire snapping nature in a rage. A man, sma as a limpet, and man, tiny as a limpet. Ogan into his shell, crawling into his shell. Then silence, then silence, and in a sudden ray o' sunlight, and in a sudden ray of sunlight, a peery bruin wren singing, a little brown wren singing. Autumn is a season of the equinox, of fierce gales and big tides. The wind seems to be predominantly westerly, as Atlantic lows chase across the sea from North America. I was interested in exploring in a novel the theme of obsession and of emotion that grows and becomes uncontrollable. A Shetland autumn seemed a good backdrop for a novel about stormy passions and irrational behavior. I very much want to set a book in Fairhour, too. Although I visit it less often now than I'd like to, this is still the place in Shetland that I know best. It's where Jimmy Perez was born and where his fictional family lives and works. Blue Lightning takes Jimmy back to his birthplace. And in a sense it takes my love of crime fiction back to its roots too. Golden Age detective stories were my introduction to the genre. I loved the tales of Dorothy L., Sayers, and Marjorie Allingham. I read widely as a young woman, but always went back to traditional crime fiction for my comfort reading. If I had a cold or had been dumped by my boyfriend, Those were the books I returned to for escape and reassurance. In Blue Lightning, I decided to write a book set in an enclosed community without access to the outside world. Sheep Craig off Fair Isle. Sheep on Fair Isle. Fair Isle was named Friedere, meaning Island of Peace, by its Norse settlers. Its outline, visible from the Shetland mainland on clear days, is distinctive and caused by the silhouette of Sheep Craig to the east of the island. Sheep were still grazed on the rock while I was working in the observatory. Traditionally, the grazing belonged to the shop, which had no croftland attached to it. When Barry Sinclair, who ran the shop then, decided he no longer needed to keep sheep there, my husband went over in a small boat with him and other men to bring back the redundant fencing. There is a chain attached to the cliff to help with the steep climb to the top. It was a precarious walk, but Tim felt that he was taking part in a piece of island history. Geese flying through mist towards Fair Isle. Since the middle of the 19th century, Fair Isle's history and prosperity have been influenced by the rare birds that visit it. Although the autumn winds are usually westerly, occasionally they move to the east, blowing towards Shetland off a high-pressure system over Scandinavia. If an east or southeast wind meets a bank of cloud or fog over the islands, the conditions are just what the bird watchers who flock north in the autumn are hoping for. Birds that have started their migration in Asia can get blown off course. And if they land in Fair Isle, exhausted after the long flight, the fog and cloud can prevent them from leaving. Fair Isle has recorded more rarities in its 3.5 mile by 1.5 mile land mass than any other place of its size in the UK. Now, a new lodge, on the site of the previous building at the North Haven and very close to the original Neeson huts that formed the first observatory, provides excellent accommodation for the scientists who ring and census the birds and for visitors. It also provides a social space for islanders and guests. Fair Isle was recognized as a special place to study migratory birds by early pioneers in ornithology. Yorkshireman Dr. William Eagle Clark encouraged some of the islanders, particularly George Wilson Stoudabusta, to learn more about the rarer birds that occasionally arrived into the isle, and presumably to shoot anything that he thought was interesting. In the days before adequate binoculars or telescopes, the saying went, "What's hit is history. What's missed is mystery." Between 1865 and 1937, Mary Du Corroy tribe, Duchess of Bedford, was a regular visitor to the island for the purpose of bird watching. She stayed at the pond for an annual rent of £2. The pond has fallen into disrepair now, though when I worked in the observatory in the 70s, it was used as a camping bod, and it becomes one of the locations for the novel Blue Lightning. Even when the house was first built, however, despite its wood paneling and loft bed, it must have been rather primitive and uncomfortable, in contrast to the luxury to which the Duchess was accustomed. The Southern Crofts on Fair Isle. George Waterston. Fair Isle was put firmly on the ornithological map by one man, George Waterston, 1911 to 1980. By the outbreak of the Second World War, George was already a regular visitor to the Isle. He first arrived in 1935 after being rowed ashore from the Aberdeen steamer as it passed by. He developed a close relationship with George Fieldy Stout, one of the island crofters, often staying with him in his crofted field. With the outbreak of war, Waterston became a captain in the Royal Artillery, but was captured in Crete in 1941. During his time as a prisoner of war, he dreamed of founding a bird observatory on the Isle, and it seemed a portent that on being invalid home via neutral Sweden, his first sight of the UK was the distinctive shape of Fair Isle sheetrock. He wrote to a friend, "Can you imagine my excitement when the first land sighted was none other than Fair Isle?" Soon after the war, he purchased the island from Robert Bruce of Sumburgh, and in August 1948 the Fair Isle Bird Observatory was opened in a group of naval huts near the North Haven. George became aware that, as laird of the island, he had a responsibility for the people who lived there, as well as for the birds that passed through. He felt that Fair Isle would have a more sustainable future with a different owner. And in 1954, the National Trust for Scotland took over as landlord. The trust still owns the island and has provided consistency and security for its residents. However, George's role hasn't been forgotten, and the small museum in the middle of the island has been named after him. In recent years, the island has developed as a center where traditional culture and crafts can flourish. Within the small population, there are still fantastic knitters, a maker of hand-built spinning wheels and Shetland chairs, and a boat builder. Lee Sinclair, a Fair Isle poet and musician, brought the haunting beauty of the Isle to a larger audience through her work. She was much too young when she died in 2013 and will be very much missed. Stuart Thompson, retired lighthouse keeper, fiddler, and spinning wheel maker. Fair Isle attracts visitors from all over the world, and not all of them are bird watchers. Many come just to explore the beauty of the island. Although it's so small, its indented coastline and steep cliffs mean that there's plenty of exciting walking to do. Craftspeople want to meet the residents who keep the traditions alive, and many visitors develop friendships that last for numerous years. Some visitors come because they recognize the name from the Met Office's shipping forecast, the almost poetic litany of weather in the UK's shipping areas, broadcast by BBC Radio. Meteorological records are still taken by the same man who was providing the service when I stayed on the island 40 years ago, Dave Wheeler, who lives at Field. At one time, he ran a successful croft, worked shifts as a lightkeeper, and was the Met officer, an example of the multiple occupations that islanders often need to undertake to survive. Stuart's wife Annie at work on a Fair Isle sweater. Stuart and Annie were Lee Sinclair's grandparents, the next generation of Fair Islanders. Two-ply by Lee Sinclair, 1971 to 2013. Athena room, inside a room, wore fiddles, where fiddles, and wheels pluey, and wheels play, Athen DY hands, in your hands. My grandfather, knew a Murid, now brown, fleece still, sheepy trow, sheepy through, DY hands, your hands, den, opera perm, then on the bobbin, Murid yarn, brown yarn, bigs up, builds up, alling the line, along the line, o hooks, of hooks, and as I pluey, and as I play, the old tunes, do's learning me, you're teaching me, do sets, you set, my doister, my daughter, till a wheel, to a spinning wheel, suyen, saying, this is dea and fur day, this is the one for you. See, work thee fit, see, work your foot, pull back, pull back, pull back, pull back, don't lat the snud, don't let the twist. Geen out in dea oo, get into the wool, Dutch dea way, that's the way. Alice sits, fit working a treat, 1 foot working the thread, the titter dancing, the other dancing. Hit a bait, oh to fiddle, to the beat of the fiddle. Pull back, pull back, pull back, pull back. Don't let the snud, don't let the twist. Gee, in Athens, by the end of autumn the days are getting shorter again. The seabirds have left, and the ravens have the cliffs to themselves. There are no more cruise ships in the harbor in Lerwick. Shetlanders prepare for the festivities of Christmas, Hogmanay, and Up Hellier, and for the cycle of the year to begin once more. Sunset on Unst, Meal Beach, Borough. Conclusion. Shetland is a landscape of contrasts. There are sheltered voes and beaches and dramatically exposed cliffs. Lush meadows full of wild flowers in the summer, and bleak hilltops where only the hardiest of plants will grow. With the changing seasons, the character of the place shifts as the dark days of winter give way to the light nights of summer. In the islands, traditions are valued and celebrated, but new technologies and ways of working, especially in energy and fishing, are embraced. Shetland is the most remote place in the UK to live, yet often it feels at the heart of the artistic and cultural life of the nation. I find it welcoming, intimidating, and inspiring. Shetlanders have been unfailingly gracious about an outsider's attempts to capture the spirit of their home in fiction, and have encouraged me to celebrate the islands in this book. I hope it will persuade more people to travel north to experience Shetland's bleak beauty and to form their own relationship with a very special place. Author acknowledgments. I'm a writer of fiction and find facts hard and troublesome things. So I was very grateful for help in the writing in this book. I'm indebted to the books of Charles Tate and Jill Slee Blackadder for sending me in the right direction. Thanks to Tim Cleeves for his research into the natural history of these beautiful islands, for sharing his passion for wildlife and his attention to detail. Thanks to Paul Harvey, Jared Unsun, and Jim Dixon for helping to identify some of the images, and to Karen Fraser of Shetland Library and the staff of Shetland Archives for finding the remarkable story of the Victorian Lerwick murder. Most especially thanks to Mary Blantz for all her support and advice, and for her sensitive translation of the dialect poems. Picture credits. Anya Diesler, Backflap. Dave Donaldson, C.UK here. David Gifford, Dave Gifford, UK here. Dave Wheeler Photography.com here. Dreamstime.com. Iowa here. Alpfeiffer here. Brochman here, Dadow here, H368K 74 here, Kutra here, Lolijing here, Markadrella Turnix here, Merciax here, Misha 72 here, Orion 9L here, Panelot here, Paul Agent here, Photonics here. Jimma Dagger, C.UK here. John Simpson, Walsey Golf Club, here. Rachel Davis, VagabondBaker.com here. Richard Weems here. Says 1980/Wikimedia Commons, here. Scottish Ornithologist Club Archives, www.the-soc.org.uk here. Shetland Museum Photographic Archive. Here. Shutterstalk.com. ABB Photo here. Abby Warner here. Iowa here. Alessandro Call here. Alfio Filito here. Andrea Obzarova here. Attila Jandy here. Barnesian here. B.G. Smith here. Bill DeGenerate Jam B.H. here. BMJ here. Chris Warham here. Cindy Creighton here. Dimitro Pilipenko here. Dryma Film here. Ernie here. Gedrius here. Here. Graham Dawes here. Graham Andrew Reed here. Jasper Image here. Krizek Vaslav here. Les Palaniuk here. Mark Huntner here. Merrick Chepanik here. Mark Hunt here. Mark Metcalf here. Matusz Zaborski here. Menno Schaefer here. Paul Reeves Photography here. Paula Fisher here. Stephen Forster here. Tardan Pleiades here. Tom Reichner here. Tori Coleman here. Trofimov Pavel here. Teat Photo here. Rona Art here. A&N Cleeves is the author behind ITV's Vera and BBC One Shetland. She has written over 25 novels and is the creator of detectives Vera Stanhope and Jimmy Perez. Characters loved both on screen and in print. Her books have now sold over 1 million copies worldwide and worked as a probation officer, bird observatory cook, and auxiliary Coast Guard before she started writing. She is a member of Murder Squad, working with other British Northern writers to promote crime fiction. In 2006, and was awarded the Duncan Laurie Dagger, CWA Gold Dagger, for Best Crime Novel for Raven Black, the first book in her Shetland series. In 2012, she was inducted into the CWA Crime Thriller Awards Hall of Fame and lives in North Tyneside. Visit the author's website at www.ncleeves.com, facebook.com/Ncleeves, at Ncleeves, first published 2015 by Macmillan. This electronic edition published 2015 by Macmillan, an imprint of Pan Macmillan. 20 New Wharf Road, London, N1, 9RR. Associated companies throughout the world. www.panmacmillan.com. ISBN 978-1-5098-0980-6. Copyright in Cleeves 2015. Cover images copyright David Gifford. Author photograph Antje Diesler. Logotype Pan Macmillan Design Department. The right of Cleeves to be identified as the author of this work has been asserted by her in accordance with the Copyright Designs and Patents Act 1988. The publishers are grateful for permission to reproduce the following poems. Winter Comes In Here and Shetland Ran Here by Jack Renwick, from the Harp of Twilight, published by the Unst Writers Group, 2007. Water Lilies Here by Vagaland, from the collected poems of Vagaland by permission of the Shetland Archives. Vorde Here by Lolly Graham, from Love's Laybrack, sang by permission of Mary Graham. Two Ply Here by Lee Sinclair by permission of Ian Best. Pan Macmillan does not have any control over or any responsibility for any author or third-party websites referred to in or on this book. Designed by Perfect Bound Ltd. Map artwork by Perfect Bound Ltd. from source material by Rainer Lesniewski /Shutterstock.com. You may not copy, store, distribute, transmit, reproduce, or otherwise make available this publication or any part of it in any form or by any means, electronic, digital, optical, mechanical, photocopying, recording, or otherwise, without the prior written permission of the publisher. Any person who does any unauthorized act in relation to this publication may be liable to criminal prosecution and civil claims for damages. A CIP catalog record for this book is available from the British Library. Visit www.pammcmillan.com to read more about all our books and to buy them. You will also find